Whispers from the Edge, a journey through America's hidden shadows. There's a rhythm to the places we claim as ours, a heartbeat woven into the creak of a porch step, the sigh of wind through a cornfield, the muffled crash of waves against deserted shore. It's the sound of home, of work, of the ordinary days that stack up into a life. For most of us, it's a comfort, a quiet promise that the world will hold steady beneath our feet. But what happens when that rhythm falters? When the familiar hum turns to a hiss, a scrape, a shadow that shouldn't be there? These are the stories of people who've heard that shift. Regular folks, from teenagers scraping by to middle-aged workers with calloused hands, who've stumbled into moments where the ordinary peeled back to reveal something jagged and alive underneath. Through their eyes, we'll wander into the dark corners of American life, from sprawling farms to lonely beaches to echoing hallways, and we'll find not just fear, but a strange, stubborn strength that lingers long after the lights come back on. Let's start with Daniel, a 22-year-old with a chipped front tooth and a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, standing on the sagging porch of his grandparents' farmhouse somewhere in America's breadbasket. He's here because his parents slammed the door on him, won too many fights about money and late nights, and this 50-acre sprawl is the only roof he can afford. The house groans under its own weight, a relic of clapboard and peeling paint, and his bedroom on the first floor is a museum of Grandma Clara's faith. Wooden crosses nailed above the door, porcelain saints perched on a dresser, a 6-foot painting of Jesus staring down from the wall with eyes that seem to track him as he shifts beneath the quilt. The air is heavy with the scent of age, mothballs mingling with stale lavender, and the faint tang of liniment Grandpa Henry rubs into his knees. For 2 weeks, it's a bearable trade-off. Long shifts at a gas station 3 miles down a gravel road, then home to collapse into a bed that creaks with every move, the drone of crickets and the rustle of cornstalks lulling him to sleep. But one night that lull breaks. It's late, past 10 p.m., and Daniel's fumbling with his keys under the weak flicker of a single bulb above the door. The air is cool, heavy with the promise of frost, and the fields stretch out like a dark ocean beyond the porch. Then he hears it. A soft crunch, a deliberate shuffle, maybe 20 feet out in the corn. His breath catches, a plume of vapor in the chill. It's not an animal. Too steady, too human. He squints into the shadows, his pulse ticking up and edges. Closer, stepping light to avoid the brittle leaves that litter the ground like landmines. There, between the stalks, he sees it, a figure hunched low, crawling on all fours. A thief, he thinks, some desperate soul after Grandpa Henry's harvest. The corn's worth a small fortune this time of year, enough to tempt anyone with a truck and a grudge. Daniel's fists clench, his first urge to shout, to charge out there and drag the bastard back by the collar. But something stops him. The movement's too odd, too slow, like a predator stalking prey. A chill snakes up his spine and he retreats, slipping inside to wake Grandpa Henry. Henry's a rail-thin man with a face carved from years of sun and worry, and he doesn't waste time. He grabs the shotgun from its rack by the fireplace, his boots thumping against the floorboards as he storms out, Daniel trailing close. The old man's voice rips through the night, raw and fierce. "Get the hell off my land or I'll send you straight to Judgment Day." The figure bolts, a blur of motion swallowed by the rouse, and for a moment it feels like triumph. Daniel's chest loosens, his breath evening out as Henry lowers the gun with a grunt. They've scared it off. The farm's theirs again, 50 acres of dirt and pride, untouchable. But the next night, sleep turns traitor. Daniel wakes to a sound, a low, guttural chuckle seeping through the cracked window pane, sharp enough to jolt him upright. His eyes snap to the glass, and there, framed in the silver wash of moonlight, is a face. A man, scruffy, wild-eyed, lips curled in a grin that doesn't reach his gaze, staring right at him. Panic claws at Daniel's throat. He shouts for Grandpa Henry, his voice cracking as he stumbles from the bed, the floor cold against his bare feet. The figure steps back, melting into the dark, and by the time they reach the door, Henry's shotgun trembling in his knotted hands, it's chaos. Something lunges from the shadows, fast and low, snagging Henry's leg. The old man crashes to the porch with a guttural yell, the gun skittering across the boards. Daniel doesn't think. He dives, tackling the attacker in a tangle of limbs and sour breath. The guy's already crouched, off balance, and Daniel pins him, knees grinding into the man's chest as Henry scrambles up, blood dripping from a scraped knee. The shotgun's back in his hands now, barrel steady on the intruder's heaving form, and Daniel fumbles for his phone, dialing the sheriff with fingers that won't stop shaking. "Hurry," he rasps. "We've got one down." But there might be more. Then a scream. Henry's scream. Daniel spins, the phone slipping from his grip, dread flooding his veins like ice water. His grandfather's on the ground again, clutching his nose, blood streaming through his fingers, staining the porch red. In the dim light, another shadow, a second man, had darted from the darkness, landed a vicious punch, and vanished into the night before Daniel could even lunge. Henry groans, his voice thick with pain and fury, and Daniel drops to his side. Hands hovering, useless. The sheriff rolls up 20 minutes later, lights flashing across the fields, but it's too late. The pinned guy's hauled off in cuffs, silent, smirking. But the second is gone, a ghost in the corn. Daniel helps Henry inside, the old man's blood smearing his palms, and they sit in silence as Clara fusses with a rag and a bowl of warm water. Later they'll rig cameras to watch the crops, their grainy feed a thin shield against the dark. But that night, as Daniel stares at the Jesus painting, its gaze now a weight he can't shake, he knows something's broken. Not just Henry's, knows not just the peace of the farm, but the illusion that these walls, this land, could ever keep the world out. What does it mean to feel safe? For Daniel, it was the rhythm of those first 2 weeks. The clink of coins at the gas station, the creak of the porch under his boots, the murmur of Clara's prayers down the hall. It was a fragile thing, a house of cards built on trust, and it took one night, 2 men, 1 laugh, a spray of blood to topple it. Safety isn't a lock or a gun, he realizes. It's a vigil, a constant scanning of the horizon. It's the flashlight you keep by the bed, the deadbolt you check twice, the instinct you hone until it's sharp as a blade. Because the shadows don't knock. They creep, they watch, they wait. And when they strike, they don't care about your 50 acres or your grandpa's shotgun. They take what they want and leave you picking up the pieces. Now let's drift miles away, to a stretch of coastline where the air tastes of salt and the night presses close. Lisa and Mark, a couple in their mid-30s, are stranded at Cedar Beach, a lonely strip of sand 2 miles from the nearest gas pump or burger joint. It's past 9:30 p.m. The gates locked tight, and with nowhere to go, they decide to walk the shore, a mile out, a mile back, their bare feet sinking into the wet sand as the waves whisper against their ankles. Lisa's hair catches the breeze, a dark tangle against the starlit sky, and Mark's hand brushes hers, a quiet tether in the vastness. For that first mile, it's just them. No voices, no lights, just the steady pulse of the ocean and the crunch of shells underfoot. It's a moment they'll later cling to, a fleeting peace before the world tilts. On the return leg, Lisa stops short, her toes curling into the sand. Beside their own fading prints, smoothed by the tide, are 2 new sets, sharp and deep, pressed into the shore like they'd been made minutes ago. They veer off toward the dunes, maybe 30 feet from the waterline, and Lisa's chest tightens. "We didn't see anyone," she whispers, her voice barely audible over the waves. Mark frowns, digging his phone from his pocket, the flashlight beam slicing through the dark as they follow the tracks. The dunes loom ahead, tufts of grass swaying like sentinels, and near a cluster of rusted trash cans, Mark spots it. A tunnel, a narrow concrete throat maybe 10 feet long, snaking toward a parking lot lost in the gloom. Lisa hangs back, her breath shallow, a warning prickling her skin as Mark edges closer. He leans in, the light trembling in his grip, and then he goes still, rigid, breathless. Inside, 2 figures crouch, hunched bare, their skin a sickly pale under the beam, wrinkled and peeling like parchment left too long in the damp. Not quite human, not quite anything Lisa can name. Their heads tilt, shadows shifting across their forms, and Mark's hand clamps around her arm, yanking her back. They don't speak, don't need to. They run, sand kicking up in frantic sprays, lungs burning as they stumble the 5-minute sprint back to the car. The doors slam, locks click, and they sit there panting, the silence between them thick with what they've seen. Mark finally chokes it out. They weren't normal, and Lisa stares at him, waiting for the laugh that never comes. His eyes are wide, haunted, reflecting a truth she can't unsee. Those footprints, that tunnel, those things. The next day, he calls the Rangers, his voice steady but thin, and they shrug it off, drunks, shadows, a trick of the light. But Lisa knows. She saw the sand. She felt the weight of those unseen eyes, and she'll never walk that beach again. That night burrows into them, a splinter they can't dig out. It's not just the fear, it's the unraveling of something deeper, a trust in the world they didn't know they'd leaned on. Cedar Beach was their escape, a stretch of shore where they'd watched sunsets and planned lazy weekends, and now it's a stranger, a place that hides secrets in its sand and tunnels. What did they see? Drifters, creatures, hallucinations, born from exhaustion and moonlight? They don't know, and maybe they never will. But the lesson isn't in the answer, it's in the feeling, that gut-deep certainty that something was wrong. Lisa replays it. Those prints, that stillness, the way her skin crawled before Mark even turned on the light. It's a signal she ignored too long, a whisper she should have heeded. Trust your instincts, she tells herself now. When the air shifts, when the silence presses too hard, don't wait for proof. Move, run, live. And then there's Ethan, a night janitor in his late 20s, alone in a Midwest high school that sprawls like a sleeping giant under fluorescent hums. The building's a U-shape, long hallways bending around a central spine, and he's got a system. Start downstairs, mop his way up, let the radio blast old rock tunes to fill the void. He's used to the solitude, the way the shadows stretch across lockers and the echoes bounce off tiled floors. One night, he's in a history classroom, maps of fallen empires curling at the edges, desks scratched with decades of initials, when a light flares on across the hall, 100 feet away. He freezes, mop dripping in his hand. He'd turned that light off. He always does, a habit drilled into him by years of routine. His pulse spikes, a cold sweat prickling his neck as he steps to the window, peering through the glass. There's a man, mid-40s, scruffy beard framing a gaunt face, eyes dark and unblinking, staring back at him. One hand rises, fingers curling in a slow, deliberate wave, and Ethan's breath locks in his chest. It's not a greeting, it's a promise, a quiet claim on the space between them. Ethan slams the blinds shut, his heart hammering against his ribs, and counts to 10, 20, 30. willing his hands to stop shaking. He lifts the blinds again, just a sliver, and the lights off. The man's gone. Panic floods him, raw and electric, and he bolts. Mop clattering to the floor, boots pounding down the stairs, out the back door into the biting night air. He doesn't care about the mess, the job, anything but the primal scream in his gut telling him to get out. Later, security footage shows the guy, a grainy figure with a face that twists Ethan's stomach, slipping into the basement, down a stairwell he's mopped 100 times. Cops scour it, every damp corner, every rusted pipe, but he's not there. No trace, no exit, just an empty maze where answers should be. Ethan replays that wave in his mind, the slow curl of fingers, the weight of those eyes, and it haunts him, a shadow he can't outrun. He's back at work now, a new gig at an office park 10 miles away, but the radio's louder, his steps faster, his glances sharper. That night taught him something he can't unlearn. Solitude isn't strength. It's a gamble, a roll of the dice that can turn cold in a heartbeat. The lesson isn't about ghosts or intruders. It's about the voice inside, the one that screamed run while his pride whispered stay. He ignored it too long and it nearly cost him everything. Next time, he won't. Next time, he'll listen when the air grows heavy, when the silence turns thick, because that's the difference between a story and a grave. These aren't just tales. They're fractures, cracks in the lives of Daniel, Lisa, Mark, and Ethan. People who could be you or me or the neighbor down the street. They're set in the places we know, grandparents' farms with sagging roofs and fields that stretch to the horizon, beaches where we've kicked off our shoes and felt the tide pull at our toes, schools where we've scribbled notes and dreamed of something bigger. For Americans from 18 to 55, these are the landscapes of our days, touchstones of youth, of struggle, of quiet joys, and that's what makes the shadows so piercing. When Daniel hears that rustle in the corn, it's not just a sound. It's the betrayal of a sanctuary he thought was his. When Lisa sees those footprints, it's not just sand. It's the shattering of a night she wanted to keep pure. When Ethan watches that light flick on, it's not just a bulb. It's the collapse of a solitude he'd built his nights around. What binds these moments is the way they strip away the veneer of everyday life, exposing something raw and trembling. Beneath, it's not always a monster. Sometimes it's a man with a crooked grin, sometimes it's a footprint with no owner, sometimes it's a silence that presses too hard, but it's always a reminder. The world doesn't owe us peace. We carve it out with locked doors and loaded guns, with quick steps and sharp eyes, and still it can slip away like water through cupped hands. Daniel learned that when he saw Grandpa Henry's blood on the porch boards. Security isn't a shotgun or a camera. It's a refusal to let the dark win, a fight you wage every night. Lisa and Mark learned it when they ran from that tunnel. Peace isn't a place. It's a choice to heed the warning in your bones, to move before the shadows. Move first. Ethan learned it when he fled that school. Solitude isn't a shield, it's a risk, a bet that the quiet won't turn against you. But there's a strange beauty in these cracks, a strength that blooms in the aftermath. Daniel didn't just cower, he tackled that intruder, held the line while Henry steadied his aim, and stood watch as the sheriff's lights cut through the fields. Lisa didn't freeze. She ran with Mark, their hands locked tight, their breaths sinking in a desperate rhythm against the unknown. Ethan didn't stay. He chose life over pride, sprinting into the night to breathe another day, to mop another floor under a different roof. That's the pulse of these stories, not just fear, but fight, a stubborn will to push back against the dark. It's the 18-year-old who leaves home with nothing but a bag and a dream, the 35-year-old who guards a family with every ounce of grit, The 55-year-old who's seen enough to know when to swing or sprint. We don't always win, but we don't go quiet. These tales echo that heartbeat, that raw American resolve to face the shadows and come out standing, or at least breathing. So why do they grip us? Why do we, teenagers with fire in our veins, adults with bills piling up, elders with stories etched in our lines, lean closer when the room grows dim and the tale unfolds? It's the thrill, yes. The way your stomach drops when Daniel hears that laugh. The way your skin tingles when Lisa spots those prints. The way your breath catches when Ethan sees that wave. It's the mystery too. The questions that linger like smoke, curling around our thoughts long after the words fade. What was crawling in that field? Who or what hid in that tunnel? Where did that man go when the basement swallowed him whole? But deeper than that, it's the mirror they hold up to our own lives, reflecting the flickers of unease we've all felt. The creak in the attic we can't explain, the shadow that darts too fast across the yard, the moment when the night feels too alive. These stories take that flicker and turn it into a blaze, forcing us to confront what we'd rather bury. They teach us too, not with the clean edges of a textbook, but with the jagged lines of survival, etched in sweat and blood. And racing hearts, Daniel's night taught him, and us, that safety isn't a gift. It's a discipline, a habit forged in the small acts we often skip. It's the flashlight you keep charged, the lock you triple check, the glance you throw over your shoulder. When the wind shifts, because the shadows don't announce themselves, they slip in, quiet and patient, and by the time you hear them, it's too late. Lisa and Mark's escape taught us that instinct isn't noise. It's a signal, a flare, fired from the deepest part of you. When your gut twists, when your skin prickles, don't wait for proof. Move, run, live. Because hesitation is a luxury the dark doesn't grant. Ethan's flight taught us that pride can wait. Life can't. When the air turns heavy, when the stillness grows teeth, you don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing yourself. These aren't just scares. They're maps, drawn in adrenaline and desperation, for navigating a world that's wilder than we admit. Picture Daniel now, months later, perched on that same porch with a mug of coffee gone cold, the field stretching out like a restless sea under a gray dawn. He's changed, his eyes sharper, his jaw tighter, his hands quicker to curl into fists. The cameras hum softly, their lenses sweeping the corn, but he knows they're just a bandage on a wound that won't heal. Safety's a vow he renews every night, sealed with a deadbolt and a prayer, a promise to himself and to Clara and Henry that the shadows won't win again. Picture Lisa and Mark driving past Cedar Beach on a crisp afternoon, their laughter thin and forced as they skirt the shoreline. They don't walk at night anymore, not there, not anywhere, and the sand feels less like freedom now, more like cage they've escaped. Picture Ethan, mopping a new floor at an office park 10 miles from that school, the radio cranked to drown out the quiet, his steps brisk when he nears a dark corner. He doesn't trust silence anymore. It's too full of echoes, too heavy with what might be waiting. These are the aftershocks, the ripples that spread from a single night, a single choice, a single shadow. For Daniel, it's the weight of family, the ache of seeing Henry's blood and knowing he couldn't stop it, the guilt that gnaws when he hears Clara's soft sobs down the hall. For Lisa and Mark, it's the fracture of trust, the way a quiet evening turned into a race for their lives, the way they now flinch at every unexpected sound. For Ethan, it's the loss of solitude, the realization that even an empty building can hold eyes, the way he now scans every shadow for a wave he can't unsee. They're not just stories, they're scars carried by people who've brushed against something vast and dark and walked away with lessons carved into their bones. And what about us? We listen, or read, or watch, because we're drawn to that edge too. At 18, it's the rush of a world we're just beginning to taste, the thrill of testing our mettle against the unknown. At 35, it's the quiet dread of guarding what we've built, our homes, our loves, our fragile peace, against a night that doesn't sleep. At 55, it's the wisdom of knowing how thin the thread is, how quickly it can snap, how many shadows we've dodged to stand here now. We're pulled in by the chill of Daniel's window, the mystery of Lisa's tunnel, the dread of Ethan's wave, because they echo our own tightropes, the ones we walk every day without even seeing them. They're a call to wake up, to see the shadows not just as threats but as guides, pointing us toward the strength we didn't know we had. So here's the truth these tales murmur. The world is beautiful, but it's not tame. It's a 50-acre farm with secrets rustling in the stalks, a 2-mile beach with whispers pressed into the sand, a school with ghosts lurking in the walls. It's the life you're living right now, the house you lock at dusk, the road you drive under a moonless sky, the quiet you trust until it turns. Daniel, Lisa, Mark, Ethan, they didn't seek their shadows, but they met them with grit and guts. And they're still here. That's the gift of their stories, the deep, aching truth they leave behind. We're tougher than we think, but only if we're awake. Lock your doors. Trust your gut. Know your way out. And when the night grows too still, don't just sit there. Listen. If these words have stirred you, if they've quickened your pulse or sent your thoughts spinning into the dark, stay with me. There's more to uncover, more nights, more shadows, more lessons waiting in the wings. Subscribe if you want to. Keep peeling back the layers with me, because the truth is we're all just one rustle, one footprint, one wave away from our own reckoning. And when it comes, we'll be ready. The hidden cache. The days after the porch attack blur into a haze for Daniel. Sleepless nights spent staring at the Jesus painting, its unblinking gaze a silent witness to his unraveling nerves. The sheriff hauls off the first intruder, a wiry man with sunken cheeks and a smirk that doesn't fade. But the second remains a phantom, a shadow slipping through the cornrows like smoke. Grandpa Henry's nose heals slowly, the bruise blooming purple then yellow across his weathered face, and Grandma Clara takes to pacing the kitchen, her rosary beads clicking in a ceaseless rhythm. They rig up the cameras, 2 bulky units perched on poles near the field, their red lights winking in the dark. But it's a flimsy shield, a bandage on a wound that festers beneath. Daniel feels it every time he steps outside. The fields aren't theirs anymore. They're a battleground claimed by something he can't name. It's a week later, a crisp Tuesday evening, when the next fracture splits their fragile calm. Daniel's out back, splitting firewood near the barn. A 30-foot structure of warped planks and rusted hinges, its silhouette stark against the fading sun. The axe bites into the logs with a satisfying thud, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. And for a moment, the rhythm steadies him. He's alone. Henry's inside nursing a cup of black coffee, Clara's kneading dough for tomorrow's bread, and the world feels almost right again, the corn whispering softly in the breeze, the sky bruising purple above. He's halfway through the pile when he hears it, a low metallic scrape, sharp and deliberate, coming from inside the barn. His hands freeze mid-swing, the axe hovering above the block, and his breath catches in a tight coil. It's not the wind rattling the roof. It's too distinct, too close, like metal dragging across wood. Daniel lowers the axe, his pulse ticking up, and wipes his palms on his jeans. The barn's 20 feet away, its double doors cracked open just enough to spill a sliver of shadow onto the dirt. He'd been in there yesterday, shifting hay bales, checking the tractor, and nothing seemed off. But now that scrape echoes again, fainter but insistent, pulling at the edges of his nerves. He glances toward the house, its warm light spilling through the kitchen window 50 yards off, and considers calling Henry. The shotgun's inside, propped by the fireplace, but the old man's knees are stiff, his temper dulled by painkillers. Daniel's on his own. He grips the axe tighter, its weight a cold comfort, and steps toward the barn, his boots crunching on gravel as he closes the gap. That night the farm changes. Henry calls the sheriff, his voice shaking as they drag the cameras to face the barn. But Daniel knows it's not enough. The shadows aren't just outside anymore. They're below, rooted deep, a threat that's been growing while they slept. Safety's gone, replaced by a war he didn't sign up for. He'll fight, axe, gun, fists, whatever it takes. But the boy who moved in 2 weeks ago is dead, buried beneath that trapdoor. What's left is a man, forged in fear, ready for whatever comes next. The light beyond the shadows. As the echoes of these stories settle, Daniel's blood-streaked porch, Lisa and Mark's frantic sprint across the sand, Ethan's flight from a school turned sinister, the chilling discovery of a hidden arsenal. Beneath the barn, they leave us standing on a precipice, gazing into the abyss of our own lives. These aren't just tales of terror spun for a late-night thrill. They're mirrors reflecting the fragility of the world we inhabit, the thin membrane between safety and chaos that we tread each day. Yet within their darkness lies a light, a fierce, flickering glow of human spirit that refuses to be snuffed out. For every shadow that crept into Daniel's fields, for every footprint that marred Lisa's peace, for every wave that chilled Ethan's solitude, there's a lesson carved in sweat and resolve, a roadmap for navigating the wild, unpredictable edges of existence. What do we take from Daniel, a young man who thought a 50-acre farm could shield him from the world's sharp edges? His nights began with the hum of crickets and ended with blood on his hands, a shotgun's echo, and a trap door that shattered. His innocence. He learned that safety isn't a birthright. It's a battle waged with locked doors, keen eyes, and a heart steeled against complacency. The rifles beneath the barn weren't just weapons. They were a wake-up call, a reminder that danger doesn't always knock. It burrows, it waits, it grows in the places we least expect. Daniel's story teaches us to look deeper, to check the corners we've ignored, because the moment we stop watching is the moment the shadows claim ground. And Lisa and Mark, whose quiet beach walk turned into a race against the unknown. Their lesson is etched in the sand, those fresh prints, that tunnel, those hunched figures staring back in the dark. They discovered that instinct is our oldest ally, a primal whisper that cuts through the noise of reason. When the air felt wrong, when the silence pressed too hard, their bodies knew before their minds could catch up. They ran, not out of weakness but wisdom, and lived to carry that truth forward. Trust the unease, heed the chill, move before the proof arrives. Life doesn't wait for certainty, and neither should we. Ethan, alone in his echoing school, faced a different shadow, a wave that lingered in his nightmares, a basement that swallowed answers whole. His flight wasn't cowardice, it was clarity, a choice to value breath over bravado. He teaches us that pride is a fragile thing, easily shattered by the weight of survival. When the world turns cold, when the quiet grows teeth, we don't owe anyone our stillness. Run, scream, fight, but don't let the dark dictate your ending. These stories, raw and jagged, are more than warnings. They're anthems of endurance. Daniel didn't just survive, he stood guard, axe in hand, ready for the next blow. Lisa and Mark didn't just escape, they clung to each other, forging strength from fear. Ethan didn't just flee, he reclaimed his life, one mop stroke at a time. Together they whisper a truth we all need to hear. The shadows don't define us. Our fight does. At 18, 35, 55, we're all walking tightropes, balancing dreams and duties against a night that never sleeps. But we're tougher than we know, forged in the quiet battles we win every day. Locking a door, trusting a hunch, choosing to rise again. So stand tall, wherever you are. Check your locks. Listen to your gut. Keep your light close. The world is wild, yes, but it's ours to claim. With grit, with grace, with every step we take into the dawn. These shadows may linger, but they don't own us. We do.